I'm Christian, and today we're going to take a look at laws. Now, you and I, we may not think about laws on a regular basis, but we are familiar with rules that we have to live by. So let's think for a moment. What rules do you have at school or at home that help you do things better? For me, we have a rule at home that if one person makes a meal, the other person kind of cleans up. And this just helps everyone feel appreciated and like they're sharing the work. We're gonna watch another episode of our 8-Bit Bible series, and that will help us understand where our big idea comes from. God used laws to guide his people. Watch this.
Today, our story is about a bunch of promises, flaming vegetation, and lots of rules.
So God created the whole world, and it was good. But Adam and Eve sinned, and sin messed everything up. God still loved them though, and even before they left the garden, God began a plan to rescue all of humanity from the bad choices they would make. It started with God talking to Abram and making him a promise that he would one day be a father of many nations and that he would live in a special promised land. He also said that all nations would be blessed through him. This seemed impossible though, because Abram and his wife Sarai were already really old and didn't have any children. But Abram believed God, and lo and behold, they had a son, Isaac. Isaac grew up, and God made the same promise to him, that he would have many children, that they would one day live in a promised land, and that all nations would be blessed through him. Isaac had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau, and God made the same promises to Jacob as well. He also changed his name to Israel. Jacob had 12 sons, and through a wild chain of events, one of his sons, Joseph, ended up in Egypt, and with God's help, he saved a lot of people from starvation and became a powerful person in Egypt. So he invited his father and all his brothers to live there with him. Over time, the Israelite family grew, and the Egyptians forgot about Joseph and became very jealous of the Israelites and made them their slaves. But God sent Moses to the Israelites, and after a series of plagues, Moses convinced the Egyptians to let the Israelites go. God himself led the Israelites out of Egypt and into the desert. On the way, they stopped at a mountain, and God gave Moses a bunch of rules that the Israelites needed to follow. These rules were supposed to help the Israelites live in the best way possible. But no matter how hard they tried, the Israelites kept breaking the rules, and they kept forgetting to trust God. Finally, though, after many years in the desert, they were ready to enter the land that God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And at first, life was good, but that didn't last long. We'll talk more about that next time.
Did you know that the television was only invented 2 years after sliced bread? Hi again, my name is Patrick, and I am going to tell you about a time when I almost got very hopelessly lost. Me and my wife were in Halifax, we were on our honeymoon, and we were going to an Airbnb, and all we had to get us there was my phone and my maps on my phone. And about halfway there, it started to rain, it got dark, we were in a forest, and my phone completely died. And we just drove, and we had no idea. We just kept going on the route that we were on, and thankfully, we eventually found a sign that told us where the Airbnb was. And we were very, very relieved to see it. And that reminds me of today's big idea. God used laws to guide his people. Last time we talked about how God intended for this world to be. He created it to be good and perfect. And then sin entered the equation and completely polluted it. In short, sin messed everything up. But God had a plan to bring all things back to him. So to pick up where Adam and Eve left off, after they were kicked out of the garden, they had 2 sons, Cain and Abel. Now because sin had a ripple effect, it affected Cain and Abel just as much, and Cain ended up killing Abel and was sent away. Adam and Eve eventually had more kids, and through their son Seth, more and more people were born into the world. Now throughout those years, sin was actually a pretty big problem. People continued to do whatever they wanted, but God was still at work. Let's skip ahead a little bit to a time when there was a man named Abram. Now God began to talk to Abram and actually made him a really big promise. Let's read about it. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you." So Abraham, hearing this promise, might have been a little bit confused. Him and his wife Sarai didn't actually have kids, so how could God make a great nation out of them? But Abram believed God, and God was faithful to him. But God didn't stop there. God also promised Abram a land for his people, a promised land. And then God changed Abram's name to Abraham and changed Sarai's name to Sarah. And when Abraham and Sarah were very old, they had a son. God's promises came true, and that son's name was Isaac. So what Abraham wouldn't have known at the time is that when God said, "All nations on earth will be blessed because of you," that God actually meant that through Abraham's family line would come the rescuer, Jesus. When Isaac eventually grew up, God made the same promise to him, and Isaac had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. And then God changed Jacob's name to Israel, and he grew up and had 12 sons. One of those sons was Joseph, who ended up in Egypt and with God's help saved a lot of people from starvation and ended up being a very powerful person in Egypt. Joseph invited his father and his family to live with him in Egypt, and over time, the Israelite family grew. The Egyptians actually forgot about Joseph and grew really jealous of the Israelites and ended up making them slaves. But throughout all of this, God never forgot about the Israelites. In fact, he brought Moses to be a great leader and actually lead the Israelites out of slavery. At first, Pharaoh wasn't exactly listening to Moses, but after a couple of plagues that God sent to encourage Pharaoh to listen, Moses eventually led the Israelites to freedom. The last plague was a pretty big one. Basically, the firstborn son of every family would die, but the Israelites would escape this plague if they sacrificed a lamb and painted their doorway with the blood of this lamb. So the blood of a lamb saved their sons. Does this sound a little bit familiar? Jesus was the lamb, and it was by his blood that we were saved. This was one of those symbols that God used to point us to Jesus. Now, once the Israelites were out of Egypt, God led them to the promised land using a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Unfortunately, the Israelites still preferred to do things their own way, disobeyed God, and ended up getting lost. On their way to the promised land, God led them to a mountain, and it was at this mountain that God spoke to Moses and gave him a bunch of rules that he was to deliver to the Israelites. These rules were supposed to guide the Israelites to live in the best way possible, and you probably know these rules as the 10 Commandments. You could probably relate to this part, I know I can. No matter how hard the Israelites tried to follow the 10 Commandments, they kept breaking them, and they kept forgetting to trust God. Now, after many years of being lost in the desert, they eventually arrived at the promised land that God had promised them thousands of years ago to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, when they reached the promised land, life was pretty good again, but that didn't last. It wasn't enough. They needed a rescuer. They needed Jesus. Now, when Jesus would eventually come, people still wouldn't even recognize him, but that is for another time. All right, that's all we got for this week. I'll see you next time.
We saw that God gave his people a bunch of rules to live by, but they simply couldn't stick to these rules. So let's join Natalie and Jacob by the campfire and see if these rules still apply to us today.
Hey guys, welcome back to the campfire. I hear that you have some questions maybe about the Old Testament. So who has one?
There's so many laws in the Old Testament. So why don't we talk about them all anymore?
You're right. There are actually 613 laws in the Old Testament. Laws that cover everything from what kind of clothes you should wear to what you can eat to how many steps you can take on certain days. But honestly, we could never live up to those laws. Does anybody else have a question?
Do we have to listen to these laws anymore? What if we mess up?
Yeah, with 613 laws, what can we even do? Well, these laws are in the Bible, so they're important, but they're for a specific time and a specific place. You know, it's kind of like a map, right, that helps guide you through. We did orienteering today, and you had a map and compass, and we had to walk through certain ways and follow certain paths, but a map is only good if it's where you're standing. So the Old Testament is a map, but it's for a different place. And we have a different map now.
What made the difference?
Jesus makes all the difference. Is that not the perfect Sunday school answer? Well, it's actually true. Jesus does make all the difference. You see, those Old Testament laws that Jacob was just talking about, they were given to the Israelite people, God's special chosen people of that certain time. They were given that map, that old covenant, that Old Testament list of laws, of ways to follow to live God's very best way. Now, Jesus enters into the scene, and he is literally God with us, come to show us God's love and what it actually looks like to live a life without sin. And when Jesus does that, he really does make all of the difference because he brings something new to us, and that's called a new covenant, a new agreement between us and God, and that's through following Jesus and living for him and saying he is the Lord of our lives. So Jesus really does make all the difference. Thanks so much for asking your questions, you guys. I really look forward to next time.
Natalie nailed it when she said that Jesus makes all the difference. The laws were given to the Israelites of that time, but Jesus came in person to show us God's love. Living by his example is everything we need to live the best way possible. Now let's break into our small groups and see how this looks in our own lives.